Please welcome the Right Honourable Lord Reid of Cardoon.
Thank you, Nuala. I have to say I didn't expect to go off as lightly as that. In fact, I had my riposte, which was going to be, Nuala, I'm sorry to hear you regret, in your words, that David Cameron didn't go the whole way. Next year, you should invite Ryan Giggs. Anyway, okay, declarations of interest, since Nuala did raise that. First of all, I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I came here for a number of reasons. One is it's really nice to come back from time to time. Secondly, because I was invited by your president, Francis Martin, who's also a managing partner of BDO. And thirdly, because my son works for BDO. He's here somewhere. And I couldn't miss this opportunity to come because this will be the only time in the last 25 years he's listened to me at all. So anyway, Kevin, one or two things. And of course, as Nuala said, I'm chairman of Glasgow Celtic. And I realise that's a hugely unifying statement at this dinner. People ask me, why did you become chairman of Celtic? We know you're a supporter, but why did you become chairman? So I know I can share with you, because you'll keep it in here. I really missed the abuse of being Home Secretary. And I drew up this sort of list short list of jobs that might give me an equivalent degree of abuse. And funnily enough, this came top. However, in anticipation of coming here and getting out alive, you will notice that I've announced that I'm handing over in October of this year. So anyway, great to be back. It's about 10 years since I've been here. And if I can just say at the beginning, seriously, it's not the first time I've been back, but the happiest day I've ever had in politics was actually my birthday. It was the 8th of May, some years ago. And I attended, at the joint invitation of a Dr. Ian Paisley and a Mr. Martin McGuinness, the inauguration of them as First and Deputy First Minister. And as I stood at the bottom of Stormont, I tell you, I actually thought as they walked down together that if the Labour government had never done anything else, just to play a part in bringing about that form of reconciliation would have made it worth, in my view, having a Labour government. So I'm absolutely delighted to have in a small way been associated with that. I got involved almost by accident. Would you like to hear how I got involved in this? It was 11 o'clock at night, and I was phoned by a guy called Alistair Campbell. And I was in Scotland. I was Scottish Secretary at the time, and he said, I said, what are you phoning at this time of night for? He said, Peter's in trouble. And I said, what's new? Because Peter had been sort of borrowing money and not telling people about it or something. But this, I said, it was something to do with passports. And he said, allegedly, he said, we'd like you to go on tomorrow and defend them. I said, I don't know anything about it. He said, yeah, but you know, you're the best guy out there. We want you to go on the morning shows right through the day and defend them because it's really bad and trouble. And Peter, you remember, was the Northern Ireland Secretary at the time. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I said, fine. And I always remember it was the 25th of January. And I went out there to defend Peter. And I started at 6:35 a.m. in the morning on GMTV. And I did every broadcast all day. And I was so successful that by 6:35 that night, I had his job. And it's an amazing transformation because suddenly, when you're appointed, you know, these 6 big guys with bulging muscles and, you know, biceps, good-looking big fellas, protection unit, they all sort of just assemble round you. And you feel as if you're in a different world. And it's difficult because people would say, where did you get them? I would say, Peter Mandelson. And sometimes... Do you know what I mean? And they whisk you off. They absolutely whisk you off. And I got in a private plane. Because nowadays you had the plane, as Secretary saying, it flew me over, and I got in cars, and I had no idea where I was going, I swear to you. There's all these guys arranging it and opening doors and so on. And it was very dark at night, and I was coming up this very long drive, and I was sort of reading documents to read myself in, and I looked up, and there was this chateau, sort of as they opened the doors as we arrived, and I said to the driver, where are we going? Who are we meeting? He said, no, this is your place. I said, this is my place, but that's a castle, you know, up at Hillsborough. And he said, yeah, this is your Secretary of State. Now, I had never had a castle before. And as we drove to the door, this chap called David Anderson came out with the tails, and I said, who's he? That's the butler. And I'd never had a butler before either. So I get out, and I swear to you, David Anderson says, Secretary of State, it's a great pleasure to meet you. Welcome to Hillsborough. He said, I know that it will have been a very difficult day for you. He said, but I'm afraid we have to discuss the running of the household. He said, so perhaps you would go upstairs for 20 minutes, and can I suggest we meet in, say, 25 minutes' time in the throne room? Now, in Glasgow, the throne room... Right? So I was beginning to kind of worry what I was getting into. But the whole of the experience of being here, and I know again I can share with you in here, it was the best job in government, the best secret job. You know, the best secret, kept secret, was how good the Northern Ireland Secretary job was. I mean, if you were Transport Secretary, every time somebody was in a road jam, they blamed you. You know, if you were Health Secretary and they couldn't get an appointment within 6 months, they blamed you. Northern Ireland, nobody blamed you for anything. Seriously. I mean, Belfast could have been in flames, and you're going down the street, you're doing a grand job, Secretary of State. And I'd say, yeah, but there was this trouble. Oh, it's the other bastards up the other end, you know. It was. So, and you also got the protection. And incidentally, I should tell you about this protection thing, because when I ceased to be a minister, as you may notice, I stood down voluntarily. Very few cabinet ministers do, the day that Tony Blair went. Or to put it another way, the day Gordon Brown came in. I don't want you to think, don't believe any of those stories, incidentally, about the tensions between Gordon and I. I was telling an audience the other night, he used to invite me around regularly to have discussions with him in Downing Street. And I mean, we all have to go around, we talk about everything in Downing Street. And on one occasion, actually, we were getting on so well, I thought he was going to invite me in. But anyway, after I stood down, they left me with my protection team, which really annoyed Prescott, because I had it for about 3 years. And Prescott's, they took off after 2 days. They removed it. Well, you can imagine. And I explained to him that in his case, the protection team was there mainly to protect the public, actually. So he shouldn't get too upset about it. But it can all go to your head. Don't worry, I do have something serious to say. But, I mean, it can go to your head because you're walking about and you've got all these guys opening doors for you and so on. The type of thing I needed when I was 18 and drinking, to be quite truthful. Right? But there I am, as sober as a judge or a solicitor. And you're walking about them, and it can go to your head. And there's one particular minister. I think, actually, I mean, I have to say allegedly, because I think it was Richard Needham. But he got kind of carried away with this after a couple of days, and he had a protection team, and I inherited some of them, and were telling me about it. They were led by a big guy called Dave Watson, who was a big Highlander. And apparently Richard Needham had said to him, he obviously loved it walking about, and it was, you know, guys opening doors and protecting and so on. Richard Needham had said to him after about 4 days, I say, he said, it really is gratifying to know that if anyone was to attack me, you chaps would be prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice by putting yourself between the assailant and me. To which Big Dave Watson said, Minister, I wouldn't like us to get off on the wrong foot. So perhaps I can just explain to you the job description. We're here to shoot the bastard that kills you. Anyway, as in Northern Ireland, I mean, I can assure you, if your head get too big, somebody would bring you down. And one of my lasting memories, and it's the final anecdote I'll tell you, was standing outside Stormont buildings. And in those days, I have to say, I smoked quite a lot. And I was going back to Hillsborough, but before I got in the car, because, you know, you've got a protected car with big, thick windows and so on and so forth, and I'm having a cigarette in the rain, and there's a girl standing next to me who I think her name was Roisin McGlone. She was a social worker anyway. She was having a fag. And she said to me at one stage, "Are you going back in?" And I said, "No, I'm not. No, I'm going off to my residence." She obviously didn't recognize me. I was a bit put out about that, you know. And she said, "Well, if you're not going back in, why are you standing in the rain smoking rather than as you go by?" And I said, as you do when you've got an armoured Jag that's armour-plated. And I said, "Well, my car's got, you know, windows that don't go down." She said, "Oh, I used to have an old motor like that." Anyway, so I am delighted to be back. I've got very happy memories. I wouldn't have left this place unless I had been instructed to by the Secretary of State, nor would my wife, by the way. She found it a constant source of amazement. She's my present wife, because my late wife died, unfortunately, but my present wife is Jewish, of Hungarian and Czechoslovak upbringing. So you can imagine she had no idea what was going on here at all. But she loved the people, and I did. And that's why I'm delighted, as Arlene said earlier, that so many advances have been made. And I want just to make a few observations about the challenges that I think remain on it. And I don't do so as somebody who is any more expert than the people sitting at that table, but somebody who comes from outside and perhaps can bring a degree of objectivity to looking at what is happening here. I always work in the phrase pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. So have a realistic appraisal of what's going on and then have the political will to overcome it. And by the way, I used that phrase during a discussion with Jerry Adams one day, and about 3 weeks later I heard Jerry on television saying, "I always say pessimism." And I felt it writing to him, saying, at least attribute it, you know. Mind you, I mean, I borrowed it from Gramsci and didn't attribute it to him. So, and he probably borrowed it from someone else. But it's a good way of looking at things. And what I want to do is just say, look, the good side we know about. Northern Ireland is a good place to do business. It's got, you know, the premier language of the world here. We've got transport links to the rest of the UK. We've got a market sitting on the doorstep. We've got 2 great universities. We've got 100% broadband access, conditional upon Nuala's appraisal. But there are a lot of good things going here. But the problem, if you are going to approach it with a degree of pessimism, of realism, then let me just go from the general to the particular. The general is we're living in a world now which is dominated by networks. So the world is completely integrated. People use the word globalization. They don't often define it. Let me tell you what I think the 2 defining characteristics of globalization are: interchange and interdependence. And with interchange comes opportunities of trade, finance, and so on. With interdependence comes vulnerabilities. So that if the world is truly globalized in a way it's never been before since the first humanoids walked out of Africa, you know, 7 million years ago, then what happens is if a financial crisis starts there, it spreads like mad across the networks and across the globe. If swine flu starts over here, the same thing happens. If energy supplies are cut off there, then it hits you at home. So at the most general level, we're living in a world which is more vulnerable in many ways than ever to match the opportunities in trade and finance and commerce and so on. And therefore, you have to have a strong economic base at home, more so than ever before, because the winds of change are going to sweep through those networks. That's the most global, the greatest level of abstraction, the global context. If you move one down in the general context, What do we have at the moment? We've got a global economic recession affecting the United Kingdom and Ireland, of course, exacerbated in Ireland by overinvestment in speculative property ventures. We've got a recovery in Northern Ireland itself, which, as far as I can see, is lagging behind the rest of the United Kingdom. We have got falling public expenditure, which is a particular problem in Northern Ireland for reasons I'll mention, and we've got potential cuts to budgets. So that's the general level. In the specific Northern Ireland economic context, which was asked to look at, we've got a higher level of unemployment and deprivation than in other parts of the United Kingdom. Now, that means a higher level of economic inactivity than you would have elsewhere. We've got low wages, high energy costs, high unemployment, and so on in that first package. The second thing, which is a huge challenge, is that we've got a high dependence on the public sector. Around, 33%, 33% of employment here is in the public sector against the GB average, incidentally, Great British average of about 21. So you're 50% higher. For reasons we understand, because of historical legacy and the troubles that we've come through. But we've got something like 75% of the GDP a few years ago was reliant on public expenditure. That is a huge percentage compared to the rest of the United Kingdom. And we've got an economy which has come from a troubled past. So that's the global and the general and the specific Northern Ireland context in which we're debating things. And I know that the most important issue facing you is this question of corporation tax. And I had a look at that. My view may be worth something, it may not be. But I also have discussed it with Francis, your president, and obviously with people that I know, with BDO and others. This is a tricky one. Clearly, there's lots of questions. Is the policy value for money? What would the rate be? What are the costs? How would the gap be funded? Because it is a significant gap because of European ruling. I mean, basically, if you devolve corporation tax, then there's money going to come off your block grant. And not only is that a question, do you then get the question, would the executive, Arlene, be tempted to recoup that, or would some people argue that that money has to be recouped from business, in which case you'd be, in a sense, giving something to Peter, but taking it back from his partner, Paul, in the business community. So I think all of those are important questions, and particularly this question of costs. Now, my judgment is, depending on whether this is phased in, depending on whether you give notice so that you get the benefits of attracting industry in with advance notice without, if you like, the deficit of immediately giving a big corporation cut to everybody who's here in the meantime. If you phase it in over a period of time, if you keep it just to profit trading and so on, it's possible that this could be manageable. Indeed, there is some evidence that a reduction in the rate of corporation tax might actually lead to an increase in the tax revenues. So I think, in a sense, with a lower CT rate, it could be manageable in terms of costs, provided there isn't this temptation for politicians to panic and try and bring it back in. What would it do, potentially? It would transform. It would be a game changer in a way that I can't think any other particular form of change in the tax system would actually work. Now, I want to put three contextual qualifications on this. There will be political concerns at the UK level about this because it fractures the, if you like, the unanimity of the United Kingdom tax systems, with all the implications of that for companies and for the government itself. And in that, there's also a likelihood that others, the SNP, in Scotland particularly, will attempt to capitalise if any concession was made here by demanding it, although there are very, very unique circumstances here and entirely different circumstances in Scotland, who already, remember, have the ability to raise income tax by 3 pence in the pound. So the first one is don't imagine this is without political problems for the government, and I'm trying to speak in a non-partisan, party-partisan fashion here. Secondly, it's not a magic wand. It depends how business responds, so there's no guarantee that by doing this it will solve all our problems. And thirdly, it isn't a substitute for the rebalancing the economy away from over-dependence on the public sector. Because unless that's done as well, when those winds of change come and hit us, then we'll be in a very bad position. However, although it is not a panacea, I believe that there are unique circumstances prevailing in this province and in this island which lend weight to the argument. Northern Ireland patently has a different and unique history. It has a different and unique geography, and it has a different and probably more challenging set of circumstances to emerge from. So my own view is that on balance, I believe that the arguments weigh in favour of devolving corporation tax. I did when I was Secretary of State for Northern Ireland 10 years ago. I believe that there's an unsustainable gap between south of this border and the province of Ulster itself. And I continue to believe it, and I believe that the benefits could include increased investment, economic growth, productivity, research and development, and employment in tens of thousands, not just 1,000 or 2,000. So that is where I stand on this issue of the economy. There are two other challenges, however, to look at. One is the general political one, and one is the social one. In politics, you can pick up any number of issues that you can claim are the priority. One of them is handling technology. I wasn't particularly good at that. I remember when I was health secretary, and the day before we had the online news in the morning, I used to turn on CFAX very early. Like Arlene, I would rise at 5:30 or 6 o'clock. Ministers do. Ministers and solicitors get up at that time in the morning. And I remember sitting in bed and trying not to wake Karine and switching on the television. Karine's my wife, by the way. And switching on the television. And I always remember I was health secretary, and the third item on it, because I didn't know anything about unwanted emails. I didn't know about the technological phrases. And I read CFAX, and it said, government to ban spam. And I rubbed my eyes, seriously, and I thought, government to ban spam? I could remember banning cigarettes. I had no recollection at all. And I mean, you can laugh at that. I could see the whole of the west of Scotland vote just floating out the window. You know, you ban spam. So I wasn't particularly good at handling technology, and that's one of the things. In fact, I tell you, it just occurred to me another one since my son in here. When I was defence secretary, I meant to phone the wife, and I pressed the button, and I heard this male voice saying, hello, you know, on my phone. And I said, hello, who's that? And he said, it's Kevin, is that you, Dad? I said, yes. I said, oh, I'm terribly sorry, I pressed the wrong button. And there was a silence, and he said, are you in charge of your nuclear weapons? So you could choose technology. Personally, if I had to choose one issue in the political front, I think it's education. Because at the top of our educational system, we do very, very well here in Northern Ireland. But actually, there is a submerged section on this iceberg where we don't achieve the levels of OSCEs and general certification that we could. And I think that's bad for business and it's bad for commerce. Don't get me wrong. I'm a bit like Nuala. I did history rather than doing one of the professions of the sciences. So I don't take the view that, you know, education should be anything other than rounded, because I'm a historian and I don't want to live in a world without literature, without poetry. But there has to be a more closely aligned direction between the everyday life of a community, including its commerce and its economics and so on. So I think that there is a need to look at a realignment of our education to see that it is serving the benefits of the whole community through our commercial and economic life. And that means science, it means engineers, and incidentally, in this new world of cyber, it means encouraging those who think outside the box, those who rebel. It means recruiting people, and not on the basis that they will always adhere to the rules and regulations, but they will challenge, because that's what this new cyber domain is all about. It's moving one beyond where we are today, and the unorthodox wins. But the general advice, if I was asked on the challenge, is actually patience in politics. Because we have moved from, somebody once said that we campaign in poetry and we govern in prose. Well, we've moved from the campaigning, the peace agreement, all of the headlines, which basically gave a degree of hard work, but also a degree of romance and achievement, to the daily grind of doing things in the executive, the things that affect people's everyday life. And people can get impatient because this does appear very mundane, but it is absolutely essential and it's absolutely necessary we take the long view of this. We are dealing with problems that are inherited here, which are part of 700-800 years of history in our community. And I recall Chou En-lai, the famous Chinese foreign minister, when asked in the 1960s, what do you think the effect of the French Revolution of 1789 was? He said, it's far too early to say. Right? And we have to have a degree of that. And incidentally, Bill Clinton, I used to talk to when he came here, and he was a huge help. And he said that he kept, for that reason, he kept on his desk a little piece of moon rock. It was 4 billion years old. So when everybody said, well, we've got to do this now, we've got to move quickly on it, he would say, guys, look at this. We're just passing through. And in a real sense in politics, the executive, whatever party you support or none, will require your support as they go through a less headlining period during which they will be attending to the government. It doesn't make it easy that it's going to be a long struggle, but it is absolutely certain. And that brings me to my final point, which is the social challenge. And the social challenge, you know, it's to overcome decades, indeed centuries of division. I believe that that will come, but you will not see that perfect harmony anytime soon, because you don't. Politics you can change quickly, in a sense, by passing a law. Economics by changing a tax rate. Social consciousness, the idea of your history and your culture and your deep beliefs, doesn't change overnight. Now, I confess to you my last declaration of interest in this, because most of this I didn't pick up from books, but from my father. My father's father was a strong Scottish Presbyterian. His mother was a strong and fervent Irish Catholic. But he loved them both equally. And that's why he hated discrimination, and he hated racial or religious divisions of that nature. He was formally uneducated, but he was a daily reader. And he read every day his missal, and he read every day his Bible. And he took as much joy from the poetry of Robert Burns as he did from the speeches of John F. Kennedy. He took it from wherever he could, and he didn't actually pay much attention to those who said you couldn't do both. You had to do one or the other. His mother was an illiterate Irish peasant, and his son was in the British cabinet. And he was equally proud of both of them. And that is why I have a degree of optimism about this province. And you may think it is a naive optimism, but it has often occurred to me that the very same chemistry, in a sense, that lies within those two streams of consciousness that make up this province, which have been the root cause of problems, actually are two huge reservoirs of cultural possibilities which are not available to anywhere else in the United Kingdom. Because there are two. You know, we can have the poetry of Robert Burns and of Yeats. We can hold up Shakespeare, and we can hold up Joyce. We can have Irish dancing and Scottish dancing. You know, why did we leave it to the Appalachians to bring together the richness of Scottish folk music and Irish folk music and call it bluegrass? It's actually ours. So what I'm saying is that I believe that the characteristics which have underlain some of the problems of the past can be the very building blocks for a great reservoir of consciousness in the future. But it won't come easily, because unlike politics and economics, it takes a much longer time. So when you say, yeah, that is a bit of a dream, it's a bit of a far-off vision, then I say to you, yeah, that might be so. But, 10 years have passed very quickly since I've been here, and the change that's taken place has been enormous. And anyway, however distant, people need dreams. And however hard and far off it might be to achieve, leaders need visions. And bringing them to reality is truly the greatest challenge for all of us. And ultimately, it's a challenge that whatever background, we all face together. Thank you very much for your invite today. Thank you.